Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Nicola Corzine, and I am the founding executive director of the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. And we are so delighted to be hosting you today for this incredible conversation that we're about to have on the impact of great entrepreneurs like you joining us today. So for those of you who may not know, this could be your first time experiencing a program from the center. The center is a nonprofit committed and dedicated to enabling entrepreneurs from all over the world to realize their maximum potential and grow. And we do that by offering programs, resources, mentorship for entrepreneurs all across the globe, all for free, all with a focus on paying it forward and making sure that we're giving to our entrepreneurs who are so generously contributing and making our society a better place. So as you may have seen in the chat, the NASDAQ Center has recently launched a huge commitment to the offering of mentorship. We believe that mentorship should be available to all of our entrepreneurs, probably now more than ever before. And because, like you, we like to dream big, this initiative has some big numbers behind it. We aim to ensure 1 million hours of mentorship for more than 50,000 businesses by the end of this year. So if you are looking for help, if you are needing some tactical, responsive mentorship in this very challenging time, we would like to make sure that we're there to support you. We've got literally hundreds of great experts on the platform ready to go for your support. And likewise, if you're sitting out there right now going, I think maybe I have some intellectual capital that I'd like to support our entrepreneurs, our business owners with, then we'd love to have you on the platform too. We need you. It takes a village always in the field of entrepreneurship, and this time is certainly no exception to that rule. So please find or become a mentor today. Sign up, take advantage of this opportunity. It's there for you who do so much for us. Now, as a reminder, we're going to be opening up for live Q&A. We do this with all of these types of programs. So if you have questions as we go through the session today, then use that function down at the bottom of your screen that you see here. Please include your questions as we go through, and we'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. And just a reminder, none of this would be possible today without the support and generous contributions of those who provide so much to the center. So to our incredible sponsors, NASDAQ, Lehigh University, Bank of the West, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, Woodruff Sawyer, BPM, NZTE, and Microsoft for Startups, thank you. You know how much we value you, and our entrepreneurs know that too. So thanks for all you do. So a couple of quick polls before we get started. I promise you we're getting close to that point in time. We have been, since the very beginning of COVID, wanting to check in and really see how our entrepreneurs are faring. It has been a long, long winter, and we know it has been a hard one for all of you. So what I want to quickly just do a quick sentiment check on is, how are you feeling in these difficult times? As much as possible, if you can give us your transparent answer to this, that just helps us kind of understand where you are sitting right now, and ideally come forward with additional offerings and programs and support for you based on how you respond to this poll. So I'm going to give everyone just a moment to complete that. I'm loving the optimism. We're never surprised to see that with our entrepreneurs. Always great to see. Right now, definitely that is trending. But again, understandably, seeing a number of you that are sitting in that surviving category. And we have been there. We know what it's like, and we appreciate you showing up for these kind of insights and these kind of inspirational moments too. They're good for the soul and good for the heart, and that's why we do them. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that poll and stop that sharing. I've got one more poll before we get going today. This one actually helps us figure out what are the next 2 to 3 months of programs that we're going to be offering at the center. So our community of 35,000 plus entrepreneurs now helps drive and guide us on what our amazing program team at the center put forward for classes and offerings. So if you can tell me right now what is keeping you up at night, I promise you will see this reflected in our next series of classes and programs that come out in February, March, and April. So to the extent that you can tell us if it's finance, sales, working through a pivot, team dynamics, certainly we're all struggling on that virtual environment and learning as we go there, that would be great. And I will let everyone take a moment to complete that. Right now, finance is coming in as a strong first, with a healthy number towards team and surviving. So let me go ahead and end that poll, let you see those results. Look for those classes coming up. Make sure you sign up for them, because obviously if we're putting them forward for you, we want you to be in attendance and get that kind of benefit and help from the experts that we can pull in for you. So again, thank you so much. And now, without any further ado, I'm absolutely thrilled to give a very warm welcome to our first special guest, Sarah Miller, Principal at City Light Capital. Sarah, thanks so much for joining us today, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you, Nicola. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you to the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center and Penn State and all the folks who are joining us today. It's so great to have all of you here. I'm very grateful to see that a lot of people are looking optimistic today. I think that here at City Light, we're generally feeling more optimistic about the way that the world is going, and especially with all the startups that we work with, and I'm sure with most of yours, you're seeing great things happen in the world, and you're having that impact. And so today we're talking about one of the products that my team has helped build, that is a free tool for companies anywhere to articulate, evaluate, and identify their impact. I think that Laurel is going to share the impact beacon into the chat here. Feel free to poke through while I'm talking. Would love to have folks kind of browse through and get familiar with the tool as we're going through this overview here. But I'm going to start a little bit with just an introduction to myself, to City Light, and what it is that we do and why we decided to build the impact beacon. And so before I share my screen, I'll give the quick background on City Light as a fund. So we're an early stage venture capital fund with an impact focus. We started about 17 years ago now, before the term impact investing was coined. And the mission was to go out and find entrepreneurs who were building products and services that had positive social and environmental impact across the education, environmental, and safety and healthcare verticals. And over the last 17 years, we've partnered with over 100 companies to build those businesses. And we've had some successes, some not so great successes, but in every case, we've had positive impact on the world. And the way that we think about impact is a little unique. And the impact beacon was really born out of a process that we've been doing internally for the last 17 years, which we believe has really helped our companies to articulate their impact in ways that they otherwise would not have, and in ways that have really helped them build better products and better businesses overall. And so I'm going to share my screen to get a little bit more into exactly what that is. I'll go into presenter mode here. Great. So as I said, the Impact Beacon is an insights platform that allows entrepreneurs to use facts and figures to identify, evaluate, and articulate their impact. And so first, I want to get a little bit more into what does impact mean for City Light. So when we think about how a company generates impact, it is through their core product or service, which means that there's some kind of data feedback loop embedded into that product that allows us to track what the impact is on a regular basis. We usually measure about once a year, but a lot of our companies actually are able to take that measurement more frequently. And I'm happy to give a couple of examples as we go through this. And actually, one of our entrepreneurs is here to talk through his product-based impact, which I'm really excited about. But the idea is that your revenue only is generated as you create that impact. So the success of the product is that positive impact, and you only make money when you are generating that impact. And so your revenue should move in tandem with the impact metrics that you're tracking. And if it's not, then we need to maybe go back and revisit the product and understand what is it that we can do to tweak this to make sure that it's generating the impact that we want it to. There's a couple of different impact metrics that can be tracked. And this framework actually comes from the Kellogg Foundation. I believe about 10 years ago, they came up with kind of a framework or a rubric for understanding what different types of impact are there and what different types of impact can you track. And so there's resources and activities, which are kind of the inputs to a business. So how much money was invested or what products were developed. And those are tangible numbers, but in a lot of cases, from the perspective of City Light, they aren't actually getting to what is the actual impact that's created by making those inputs or by having those inputs in place. And so what we focus on a lot more and what the impact beacon will spit out basically are outputs, outcomes, and impact. And the difference is here, if I can use an example to paint the picture, the difference between outputs and inputs or outcomes and inputs is an input is pretty static. It's going to be, the same amount of money can get put into 10 different companies. They are all going to have different outcomes based on that investment. And so for somebody that is trying to maximize impact in their investment, they're going to want to see what is the actual impact or what happens to the consumer or to the user of this product as a result of my investment, putting it into their hands, that makes me feel that there's more impact being had. And so we usually think about this in terms of, or the best example that we give is in terms of colleges. If you think of for-profit versus nonprofit schools, for-profit schools are predicated on, or their revenue model is predicated on getting people to sign up to enroll and to take classes. They collect revenue at the beginning. They aren't necessarily incentivized to invest in their students and make sure that they're graduating, that they're getting jobs, that they're getting higher incomes. Whereas not all, but a lot of nonprofit schools or kind of alternative education solutions are incentivized to make people kind of move further in life and to go to get a better job or to get a higher salary, because they may only be paid if that happens. And so, but if you are an investor looking at those two different options as an investment opportunity, if you're an impact investor, you're going to look at the for-profit school as, yes, I can put the same amount of capital to work there, but what happens to that school 5 years from now when I know based on their outcomes that people aren't getting what they were promised? And we've seen that happen currently with for-profit colleges becoming the focus of a lot of legal battles because people feel defrauded because they were not really given what they were promised as a result of going to that school. And so for City Light, we really focus on what are the outcomes and the impact short and long term for the end users of the product that we can point to say, this product that we invested in had positive impact because of for these reasons. And those reasons change based on what the company is. Every company has a different outcome that they're aiming for. Sometimes the impacts can be kind of melded together across some of the different companies that we invested in a portfolio. But overall, we focus on what are those outcomes or the impact that is unique to this business. Because if you're trying to track something that isn't relative or isn't useful for you to understand as it relates to your product, you're not going to track it, or it's going to feel like it's too many resources being wasted to track this thing that you really don't use on a day-to-day basis. And so we try to focus on what are those metrics that should be relatively simple for you to capture that can lead to understanding some of these outcomes or this impact. When we went about building the impact beacon, we relied on, and you'll see at the top right here is a screenshot of the impact beacon. We used a lot of resources that were already available. So the impact metrics and management space is nothing new. We're not the first ones to build a tool. We're not the first ones to build a framework, but we believe we are the first people to build one that is directly directly for entrepreneurs. So some of you may be familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Some of you may even be familiar with GEARS or IRIS Plus or B corporations. All of these organizations have specific metrics and rubrics and assessments for measuring and managing impact. The UN SDGs is probably the most widely available and the most widely understood. And part of that is the simplicity of it. They are very straightforward about what each of the goals means, what the ideal metrics are that one would track underneath each of those metrics. And so we built on top of that. We said we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to take some of the resources that the UN has developed, that BLab, which tends to be a little bit more ESG focused, wanted to pull some of that in, wanted to pull some of the GEARS ranking system in to say, this is how a company can map themselves to all of these different frameworks. But we're giving you something that is, instead of just saying, here's a static measurement of your impact based on a couple of things that you told us, here's what's the potential for you to have if your business grows 10x in 5 years. If you go down a different path and decide to do something different with the business, here's a different outcome that you could achieve. And so the impact beacon is designed to be not necessarily an exact measurement of your impact. It's designed to be a way for you to better tell your story and a way to make decisions. You'll see when I go through some of the impact beacon that there's different paths that you can take throughout it. And so you may decide at some point during your business journey that you want to tackle something else, or maybe the thing that you've been trying to work on isn't panning out the way that you thought. And so how do I make decisions based on what my potential impact is that will allow me to decide which course to take? But the point is here that this is building on top of a lot of the existing work that already exists in the space. And I would encourage everybody to take a look at some of these resources to get a sense for what's out there and how the impact beacon interacts with all of them. This also came out of a process, as I somewhat described for City Light, that we call the impact pro forma. And so when we look at a company, because it is a product-based impact thesis, the product itself is generating the impact, which means that the same inputs or the same drivers that drive revenue are going to be driving the impact outcomes. And so this is a blurred out, but a screenshot of one of our company's financial projections. So they send us a 5-year financial projection to say, this is what we think we can accomplish in 5 years if everything goes to plan. And they have their financial outcomes with, which is just kind of a coefficient of, or a multiplication factor of the drivers. And then we basically take that and say, okay, this is, you have these drivers, you're understanding them from a dollar point of view. So number of users in this case, number of users times dollar per user equals revenue. Pretty simple. when we think about the impact outcomes, we're taking the lens of not how many dollars are created, but how much impact is created. So same number of users, but instead we try to understand what is the impact per user and what is the unit economic of impact that we can drill down to say, when we multiply that same driver by this new coefficient, what is the impact outcome that we achieve? And the important thing here is that we're using the same assumptions that they have in their financial projections to project the impact. So it's the same growth rate, the same drivers in every single case, which means that we effectively get a projection of what this business could look like in 5 to 7 years if they hit all the milestones they think they're going to. And as an investor, that means that 1 or 2 years into the business, we can revisit the impact metrics and say, okay, we missed revenue by 50%, which is more common than meeting the revenue expectations. But say we missed revenue by 50%, how did we perform on impact? Did we also miss by 50%? Because that at least means that our unit economic of impact stayed the same. Or did we miss on impact by 75%, which may mean that unit economic that we were using at the beginning either isn't correct, or we really need to go back and revisit the product and figure out a way to make it work better. But the point is here that you're using the same information to get to a different story that is not just being told with dollar signs. And the impact beacon tries to make that impact pro forma process as easy as possible. So when we built this, we took all of those metrics from the third parties that I just outlined, like the Sustainable Development Goals, like the Iris Plus and Gears and BLab, and we laid them all out. And we said, these are all of the metrics in the known universe that we can find from these third parties and from some of the companies that we've worked with. And what questions do we have to ask of a company to get to these answers? So what would a company have to tell us in order for us to understand what type of impact they want to have? And so we worked backwards and we got to 5 different questions to make this as simple and as quick and as user-friendly as possible. We did not want this to be a 3-hour survey where you're answering 400 questions about the business and telling us, ranking things on a scale of 1 to 10 and having to dig up documents. This is intended to be, imperfect. It is intended to be for you to tell your story from an impact perspective using some of these numbers. And so I'll go through this when I do the demo in just a second, but you only answer your sector, the issue you want to focus on, the impact and the outcome. And then you can play around a little bit with what inputs you have to project what your business is going to be capable of. And this is what that looks like. So when you get to kind of the end node here, and again, I'll show this in a second, you get to fool around with what type of impact you think you can have and what size of impact you think you can have. Because part of what we're trying to get at with this tool is we don't want you just telling the story about this year I'm going to be able to save 4 million kilowatt hours in carbon offset equivalents. We want you to be able to say, in 5 years, if I meet the scale that I think I can get to, here's what that picture looks like. And that's the same story that you're telling usually from a financial perspective of, I can get this business to $100 million in revenue. We're trying to get you to tell that same story from an impact perspective. And so that's where we call them dials, but that's where these dials come in, and you can arrange the inputs in whatever way you think is most representative of what you can achieve. And so this is what the output of the impact beacon looks like. It's something that we wanted to make it in a very simple PDF format so that it can easily go into decks, onto websites, into marketing materials, wherever somebody wants to use it. But it's clean, it's simple, and there's a second page here that's not showing up in the PowerPoint that has all of the sources linked as well. And so the reason that we do that, I'm using the example of one of our companies here. The reason that we think this is useful is because it helps with everything in your business. Marketing and storytelling is probably the single largest impact of having impact metrics to rely on, because you're able to tell the story, as I said, in a much bigger way. But we've also seen this impact revenue. So if you are focused on the product actually working from an impact perspective, we have, in our experience, seen this lead to increased revenue, because customers are happier when the product is working, and they're more likely to buy it again. There's secondary impacts that come out of this. So a lot of the companies that we work with, by virtue of focusing on impact in their product, end up focusing on impact from different perspectives as well. So where they're hiring from, are they hiring diversely? Are they opening up offices in places that are opportunity zones? Are they giving back part of their profits to nonprofit causes that they care about? It also helps with hiring. We've been able to get incredible talent join some of our companies as a result of them having impact metrics, because people want to work for companies that are doing good. The same is true for partnerships and for stakeholders. They want to be associated with, they want to be working with companies that have positive impact, and impact that they can point to and say, we know this is real because it's being measured and we're tracking it as much as we can. So that's the end of my slideshow here. And now I'm going to open up the actual impact beacon. So let me get back to the share here. Give me 1 second. All right. So everybody should have this in the chat, and I'll try and go relatively quickly here, so we have time for David to walk us through as well. But this is kind of repeating a lot of things that you've already seen. So the Impact Beacon is an insights platform that allows entrepreneurs to use facts and figures to identify, evaluate, and articulate their impact. If you click on any of these are our founding partners here. CitySpark is the seed fund of CityLight. If you click on any of our partners here, it will tell you about the partners and how they're using some of the data. You'll see the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center in Penn State on there. But when you get started with the Impact Beacon, the first page that it takes you to is 2 questions about your company. So we ask you for your name and the website of the company, so that we can provide a little bit more context, and so that we can understand as you submit feedback to us, because the first thing that we know about the Impact Beacon as it's being launched is that this will be wrong. It's version 1.0. We are absolutely aware of the fact that it is going to be imperfect and that there are going to be things that we need to fix. And we want your feedback and your advice on how to do that. And so part of this is by providing that information, we're able to tweak the Impact Beacon further and make sure that it's a better fit for you and your experience. So I obviously have a dummy name in here for now, but we've built this out for the 3 sectors that we focus on initially, with the intention to build out more paths here as we get more feedback from companies, as we start to understand different sectors better. And so the company's focus is pretty straightforward. We're asking kind of, what sector do you think you work in? And so for the purposes of presentation, I'll select the environment here. And then when we ask what you're solving for, we're asking kind of what is the topic within that sector that you are trying to tackle. And you'll see, so all of these metrics, or all of these line items here, come directly from the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So they're directly related to a lot of the metrics that are already out there, and we link all of those here. So if you want to check on some of these resources as you're going through the Impact Beacon, we make that easy for you. But let's say none of these apply to you. At every step along this process, you'll see an other, where you can say, listen, this doesn't apply to me. I really need to have a different path created to match what my company does. And so you can put in your name, your email, and why this doesn't fit for you. We receive all of that feedback, and we will continue to build the impact beacon to match the paths that are requested from entrepreneurs. But again, for the sake of demonstration, I'll say that I'm trying to solve for responsible consumption and production. My product or service does recycling, and I'm trying to reduce usage of resources. So that lands me on this, what we call the dials page. And again, if none of these apply to you, you can click here and tell us why. Because part of the building process for this part of the beacon really came from looking at third-party research that was out there around, why does it matter if I recycle? What impact does that have on climate or on income or whatever the right metric is? We had to figure out why does this outcome make sense based on the inputs that I'm going to give it? And how do I kind of work backwards from wanting to identify and quantify that outcome into things that I can measure based on my business? And so this is where we give you kind of the flexibility to say, is my company going to recycle 650 tons of a product over the next 5 years, or is it going to be 1,000, or is it going to be 90? So you can do that at any point along this process, and you can play around with this as much as you want. In this case, we have a bunch of different selections for the type of product that you can recycle, because the research that we can find is pretty extensive on what is the carbon impact of recycling all of these materials. And so let's say I wanted to be recycling newspaper. I can click through here and now see, okay, this is the potential impact that I have if I manage to recycle 660 tons of newspaper over the next 5 years. But I can also change this out. So say I'm really early on in my thought process and I'm thinking, my company is going to do recycling. I haven't decided whether I want it to be for newspaper or for something else. I can flip around in here and say, well, plastic actually has a much bigger impact on the carbon equivalent offset for landfills. And so maybe plastic is really the type of product that I should be focusing on. And so this is where we talk about kind of decision making and being able to use the beacon as a tool for deciding or for just informing around what does impact look like based on different decisions that I make, and how do I prioritize based on some of the things that I'm learning through this. And then finally, we have the sustainable development goals that each of these we call these cards, but each of these cards can impact. And so if you are impacting landfill space, that touches on sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, and climate action. And you can retrieve all of these results and as many times as you want, saying, I want to export my results. You put in your company email. You can tell us whether you want to be considered for funding, and you tell us whether you're the founder. And then you can export your results to a PDF. And this is the PDF that I was showing just a second ago, where it's kind of formatted in a way that can be easily used in your pitch decks or on your websites. And then there's this many, all of these references below. So I know I've been seeing some of the questions come in. I apologize that I haven't been paying too close attention, because sharing the screen, I'm not able to see all of the Q&A. But I'm gonna close my screen now. And I think let me take a quick look at the chat here. Give me 1 second. So just to answer a couple of the questions before we invite David up. So the impact beacon is designed to be applicable to any business. The scale at which we've created for the different inputs are more designed for early stage companies. If we tried to go too high up with some of those inputs to say, Microsoft can use this and say that they're recycling hundreds of millions of tons of office paper every year. It would make it really difficult for people who were earlier to put in their very small input. And so we wanted to make that more applicable to kind of early stage entrepreneurs to be able to make decisions based off of what they were finding in here. And so, and impactbeacon.org, it is a nonprofit. CityLight created it, but we want this to be a free tool accessible to everyone. For us, the goal is that companies are thinking more about their impact and that we're building more impactful companies because they're using this product. So I think that I might be right on time for inviting David up to talk to me. So I'll give a quick 20-second intro to David, and then I'll probably ask him to introduce himself as well. So David is one of the entrepreneurs in our City Spark portfolio. And as I mentioned, City Spark is the seed fund for CityLight. We invest $50,000 into companies that we think have very positive impacts, that are doing incredible work in the world. And David is one of those entrepreneurs. And so I have invited him up here to tell us a little bit more about, I think, David, it would be best to start with your background and a little bit of, how your entrepreneurial journey got started, because I think a lot of folks in the audience are also along that journey. And so let's start there, and then I'll ask you a little bit more about the beacon.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for inviting me, and a great presentation on the Impact Beacon. I'm so excited to be here with you today. So I am David Yanes. I was born and raised in Mexico. I became an entrepreneur by need at age 14. I became homeless, and my goal immediately became to stay at school at all costs. So to do that, I was basically collecting and selling aluminum cans to supplement my income to stay at school. And that's what carried me in part. Obviously, I had to do some other things along the line. But by the time I graduated as an industrial engineer, I was able to sell millions of these aluminum cans to Golden Aluminum in San Antonio, Texas. And I discovered that in Mexico, there is no aluminum, no mining, no bauxite. And so we were importing, or we're still importing all the aluminum in Mexico. And then the environmental impact. So by getting into that space, I understood more. And it ended up that recycling was the tip of the iceberg. And that was a great experience. I learned a lot. And then after exiting that opportunity, I basically follow my passion in automotive manufacturing. I had a great opportunity to work for a company. Its name is Brembo. They do premier brakes for cars and motorcycles. They're in the transportation industry. And I was able to be connected to great mentors, basically following problems all my life. I learned that following problems, that's where you find the best mentors and the best people trying to solve those. And that's what took me to Michigan in 1998. I had my second chance to start my second entrepreneurship in Detroit. And we basically started a company to supply products and services to the automotive industry and their supply chain. In 2003, we basically bootstrapped the company, and I co-founded with two other friends. 2004, I moved back to Mexico. I knew the territory there, and I started the business there. 2007, I moved back to Brazil and started the business there. By 2008, the company was north of $20 million of annual recurring revenue, 11 locations, 3 countries, 1,100 team members, and hundreds of large companies. And then we experienced a terrible financial meltdown. As you guys remember, in 2008, the global financial meltdown, and it was scary. A lot of our customers went bankrupt. You're talking about the GM, the Chryslers. They were all customers to us. But we were very lucky. I wouldn't claim that we got really audacious and we got smart. It was luck. We were at the right time, at the right place, with the right customer portfolio. Because what happened at that time in 2009, for the automotive supply chain industry to survive, they moved to Mexico. And to give you a quick perspective, Mexico was assembling 1 million vehicles, cars in 2009 per year. Fast forward 2017, that went to 4 million. So the industry 4x, and we were there, and we outgrew that market. But it was very painful. It was very painful. Last year, that company clocked close to $100 million of annual recurring revenue, twice the number of team members, 5 countries, 20 locations, and a very, very large scale, at least from going from zero to a middle market company. But getting there was not easy. It was very, very scary because it's a very labor intensive industry. It's also a very complicated supply chain, and it's also a very demanding customer base. And every time there was an exception in execution in labor intensive companies, we were impacting delivery quality and seldom safety. And every time we asked ourselves why this happened, 9 out of 10 times we went down to the human factor and the atomic level unit of the operating system, which was basically a paper-based work instruction to teach, direct, and develop people. And I couldn't believe 2015, we were still guiding our people with paper-based systems. And this was only the tip of the iceberg of a deeper problem. The iPhone was launched in 2007, and I couldn't believe we didn't have another way. So couldn't find a solution, talking to customers, and that's how we founded Endonix. And basically with Endonix, we solved that problem. We basically enhance, upskill, and connect people that don't have a choice to work from home. We're talking about 30 million people like that in US only, 140 in Latin America, and 2.6 billion in the world. So we were onto something, and that's how we decided to start Endonix back in 2017. We raised our first fund, and we were so happy to have See the Light believing in our story. And here I am with you guys today to fight another day.
Thanks, David. So I know David was one of the first people to be able to go through the beacon and gave us some feedback and pointers on how we could build this to be more efficient and more helpful for entrepreneurs. And so, David, if you could just tell the group kind of how you thought about answering the questions in the beacon and how you kind of went through the process and what you were thinking as you were answering some of the questions.
Thank you, Sarah. We became really excited when we learned that this tool was available, because it was important to tell the story. We definitely start with the frontline worker, the base of the pyramid in the economy of labor-intensive companies. So finding a way to connect the dots, it was easy to tell, an investor how much money we aim to make, how much value we aim to create financially. To a customer, hey, this is the value prop. We're going to improve your productivity, and your bottom line is going to grow by X for every dollar you invest in our solution. It's going to grow by 10X. But there was a piece missing, which is the end user. In our case, 9 out of, and I would say in 90 out of 100 people that work in labor-intensive industries are frontline workers. So we knew there was more to it. And when we actually connected the dots to the solution, like you mentioned during your presentation, it was very intuitive, because all the metrics that are used in labor-intensive companies to measure productivity, safety, quality, the financial metrics, they were there. So they were easy to select. The process was very intuitive. Selecting the initial impact, we know that in order to create value to our customers, the end user, the frontline worker, needs to improve training. So it was easy to find education. And quite honestly, once we connected with those two main drivers, it was easy to iterate and see what happens if we improve 1% productivity, what two. We have customers, we have improved up to 10%. So playing with those numbers, like iterating, was easy to find the dream and say, well, if we can have up to 100,000 frontline workers, and we improve 5% productivity, for each one of them, what's the impact? The rest was basically the Beacon toolkit was able to produce that for us. So it was very easy, intuitive, and very valuable to be able to tell the story from a social entrepreneurship point of view.
That's super helpful. Thanks, David. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've used the Beacon's outputs, whether it's gone into pitch decks or how you've used some of the outputs to talk about Andonics with customers or investors or other stakeholders? Yeah,
absolutely. We have learned through experimentation and by experience that selling your business is all about storytelling. We basically have so many stakeholders. When we're going in front of a customer, you got to tell the story on why you and why now and how to persuade them to try it. Once you break that barrier, you have end users, and you cannot take them for granted. You also have to be able to tell them what's in it for them and how is it going to be better. And the same thing goes with investors. When you're selling your business, you gotta tell investors why this is a good opportunity. I think that for every single group of stakeholders, we literally may come with some key messages that could resonate. An investor may resonate on how many, what's going to be your multiple, of your valuation or your exit, your return. For a customer, how much are you going to improve their profit line? And for a stakeholder or an end user, what is it going to improve their lives when they're doing their job every day? But when we look at the business model from a holistic point of view, we knew that there was a part missing, especially when we look at the legacy business models from last century, that maybe at that time it was not completely known that the impact they were going to have. Think about the internal combustion engine, the mobility industry, that they were very successful, but they had collateral damage with environmental issues. And I think most of those business models had that. So we wanted to make sure that when we were telling our story to every stakeholder, we were also telling them why we were basically having impact to our community, to our environment, that was not going to become a legacy issue or collateral damage. So being able to articulate to every single stakeholder your mission, why this matters, and doing a decent profit decently, it stimulates people to align themselves with a mission. And perhaps for investors, being aligned in vision, value, and value added is important. And when they see that, see the light, so that in us, and we're very humble for that vote of confidence. But it was easy to know this is the right investor for us, and we hope to be the right company for them. The same thing happens with customers and with end users. So creating that alignment, that cohesion, and then the collateral of our impact is that we can make a decent profit decently. I think that's where we see the magic of using these in a meaningful way to bring the business, the mission, and the vision together.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit more about, and I'm shifting gears slightly away from the Beacon now, and you touched on this a little bit earlier with your background and your story, but when you think about starting a company and why you started this company, what are some of the reasons that you would say, I started a company because I wanted X? What are some of the drivers for you, or what you were hoping to get out of it?
Yeah, I think during different phases of my life, my motivation, I would say, has an evolution. When I was 14 years old, it was out of need because I needed to survive, right? It was all about the survival game. And ultimately, by solving that problem, I learned about deeper problems that were more important than like the environment, being able to impact a trade deficit for Mexico at that time. And that's really where I learned that, starting with an idea, starting with a problem, starting with a need is really the tip of the iceberg. Because once you dig a little bit deeper underneath the surface, you start learning about if your idea also has a positive impact. And of course, as I have been evolving in my entrepreneurial life, maybe other opportunities come to mind, or they get in front of me. But I really believe in purpose. I really believe in having passion in what you do. Also, being a protagonist of some of these problems. I was a frontline worker. I know what it is to work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week in front of an assembly line, or being on your feet. And also, the power of opportunity. And when opportunity is met with preparation, that's when magic happens. And so by learning these along the path, and then being able to say, can I pass this forward? Can I do something better? Can I fix a bigger problem now? I think that the mix of experience, the mix of need, passion, and purpose, that's what makes me jump into to be able to have some meaningful impact and aspire to leave this world in a much better way than I found it.
Great. And then I think I have one more question for you, or maybe two. But the first one is, what does success mean for you and for Andonics? Like, if you can project 5 years from now, and pretend I'm not an investor for a second, but if you were project 5 years from now, what does Andonics look like? What would be the success story for the company?
Yeah, this is a great question. For me, this is a combination. When I started my manufacturing company, I got super excited when we made our first dollar, when we reached a sales milestone and so on and so forth. But what made me really happy was when I was able to say we generated 100 new positions, and we employed another 500 people, and now we are opening in Mexico, and we have another 100 people. So I was always keeping tabs on, we are 1,000, 2,000, can we get to 5,000? Now with Andonics, of course, we have milestones that when we talk about the picture of success, and when we say revenue is going to get to 100 million and valuation is going to be $1 billion, that's exciting. But what makes me really proud and inspires me to go is, that now with Andonics, we can go above and beyond the 2,000, 3,000. Just last year, we were able to impact 10,000 users that didn't have a choice to work from home, to help them go back to work safely. When we look at the numbers, 30 million in America, 140 million in Latin America, looking at 100,000 now is realistic. And when I say, can we push that to 1 million? And when you look at the impact and articulating that in terms of the beacon, you're talking about, improving, the base of the pyramid, the poverty line, because they can capture more value because they have better training, better education, better health, a much better work and economic growth in their communities. So that's where I get really excited, and that's where I would say, for me, the picture of success is when I could say we had touched 100,000, 1 million lives, and we created a positive impact, a person at a time.
I think that's a really good point, and something that we didn't touch on before, that the beacon does kind of force you down one path to say your company works in education, and you have to keep selecting this choose your own adventure until you get to one end piece. But that is absolutely not the case. Like, no company only has one impact. And so David, when he's filling this out, you're going down the education path because there's education for the people that you're training. You're going down the safety path because you're trying to do safety at work. And so there's multiple outcomes or outputs that can come out of using the beacon that are more representative of what your company is doing as a whole than just one or two metrics that are indicative of what you're being able to accomplish. So the last question that I have would, and this is kind of the quintessential last question, is what advice do you have for other entrepreneurs who are looking to build impactful companies? How do you incorporate that into the company from the very beginning?
Well, there's so many different angles, right? Depending on what you're doing, how you're doing. But I think that the first I would say is, believe in yourself, believe in your resilience, because it's not going to be an easy path. You're going to have amazing days, but you're going to have terrible days, and you probably have 10x terrible days than great days. But those are needed because I call them, the only way you can succeed is if you try and fail. And sometimes it takes 10 times failing to succeeding. So I would say it all goes down to resilience. And the only way to be resilient is to have passion, believing what you're doing, have that gut feeling that what you're doing has meaningful impact. Because sometimes money is not going to be the driver. You're going to always need more. You're always going to be able to create these enterprise value, but ultimately the reward is not going to be there. The reward is in achieving that success, staying passionate, believing in what you're doing, and if you love what you do, you will never work a day in your life. So I think that is that. There's so many more advices. I think that's the fundamental, because it's definitely a marathon. It's not a 100-meter race.
Wonderful. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us. I know we find you super inspiring. I hope that everybody else found David very inspiring. I know that the link for Andonics has been shared in the chat. David may be too humble and shy to do this, but if anybody has small businesses that have frontline workers, or if you're trying to increase safety for your workers, please check out Andonics. It's an incredible product. They have been absolutely essential for a lot of businesses, especially during COVID shutdowns. And so check it out, and hopefully some of you will be in touch. But I think it is now. Thank you so much. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me.
I think it is now my turn to invite up Meg from Penn State. Hi, Meg.
Hello.
I'll pass it off to you. Have fun.
Okay. Well, it's inspiring and difficult to sort of follow both of you, but I'll give it my best shot here. So hi, everyone. My name's Meg Small. I'm the Director of Social Innovation and a faculty member at Penn State. For those of you sort of not familiar with Penn State as a university, we are in the central part, a very rural part of Pennsylvania. We are a land-grant university. And what that means and why it's sort of relevant here is that we actually have three balanced components to our mission. So we have education and research, which I think people are mostly familiar with in large universities, but we also have an outreach mission. And that means that it's not enough for us to sort of keep our assets and our capabilities and our discoveries sort of just in the academic setting, but we are actually mandated to take these out into the community for impact. And of course, back in the day, we started doing that with our agriculture partners across the state and then across the country, and now have been looking for ways to do that in all different types of sectors. So I'm really happy to be here and supporting the absolutely incredible work that you all are doing. And I really should have titled sort of this presentation, Better Together, because what I'm going to turn to now is sort of taking the data and the impact beacon and showing how we would love to sort of put this into a collective data repository that we're building as part of our partnership with the NASDAQ Center. Thanks, Laura. You're going to pull up my slides there. So two sort of interesting things. Well, one, my background is in public health. So I see my connection into social impact sort of directly. I'm also on faculty for our entrepreneurship minor, and I work a lot in sort of mobile health technologies and sort of human development technologies with our student teams who are in our entrepreneurial program. So, but that is not my core area. I have, very little experience in that, and I'm completely learning as I'm going. But I started to see sort of the connection between health and human development and the entrepreneurial process. And I think David just did a beautiful job sort of talking about resilience, because that's one of the sort of the components that we study in youth in sort of human development that predicts all kinds of good outcomes later in life. So that's just one small example. But we are situated, we do work with our partners in schools of business that are really focused on entrepreneurial research. But in sort of a surprising fact is that we're actually located in the College of Health and Human Development, and we're part of this larger infrastructure in our Social Science Research Institute. And so I'm here today to sort of represent the work that we do around our Evidence to Impact Collaborative. We've been really fortunate to have Penn State and other partners invest in an infrastructure that we would really love to sort of share with all of you. Again, showing how we can use collective data to tell these really important stories, to mobilize for action across all sorts of systems that we would love to have sort of take action to support the work that you're doing. So policymakers, capital allocators, and even down to the individual level, sort of that recruiting and retaining talent. So Laura, I'll have you go to the next slide. Great. So this is a really simple slide, but I think it's really powerful in that I see the entrepreneurial process as absolutely central to human flourishing. And human flourishing has gotten a lot of attention lately and thriving and well-deserved attention. And I think about this in two ways, and we do in the college as well. First of all, sort of working on these social impact benefits has benefit to the individual and the human flourishing. And I think, David, you just did a terrific job sort of talking about that, like how it's benefiting you as a founder and potentially your team members. And I did not coordinate slides with Sarah, but I'm actually going to reinforce a lot of what was on that slide of sort of secondary impacts. So we know that, again, sort of amplifying and understanding that social impact has benefit to the individual team. But then also, obviously, the products and services you're producing have impact to the larger community. And ultimately, I'm going to make the case at the end of this, potentially to our culture, by showing sort of what's possible through business and entrepreneurship to sort of do both. Financial returns and social impact. And again, I think we're better together when we sort of have collective data to tell this story, to generalize this story. So I'm going to start, next slide, just sort of at the individual level. Many of you might be familiar with Marty Seligman's work. I'm not going to get super academic on this, but again, David, I just cannot say how grateful I am for you to share sort of your personal experience, because as you were talking about that, I mean, you can just see sort of real life examples across all of these dimensions. The one that I was, going to speak a lot about is this meaning, right? That by doing all these really hard things that everybody, I'm sure in attendance today has to get up and do every single day, without that direct link to meaning would be even harder than it currently is. But again, that engagement, that feeling in flow, that feeling fully alive, I think sort of the entrepreneurial experience or the experience of an innovator really does sort of tap into that. And then the other ones are also really present too, that accomplishment of seeing something grow. That just is such a human, something that we share as humans. So that obviously has important implications for individuals. Next slide, Laurel. And again, Sarah, I did not coordinate with you, but I also wanted to think about flourishing at other levels, right? So we have individual flourishing, and then we have your business flourishing and thriving. And I looked across the literature and talked to some friends in our school of business and said, no, there's good evidence here that the business and community outcomes, those bulleted points there, are well established to a great deal, except for that last one. So what I'm really excited about is the opportunity, again, for this collective storytelling. While the data that are coming out of the impact beacon are incredibly important for your individual entities and the stakeholders that surround your individual entities, I would argue that we really can make a cultural shift here in again, what's possible using business as sort of this mechanism for good by pulling our information, our inputs, and sort of sharing them broadly with critical stakeholders. Next slide. Okay, so here's what I'm sort of talking about in these data-driven stories. And this is just sort of one way that we look at it. There's other heuristics and models, but I'm gonna just sort of walk you through some really concrete examples of what we're going to be doing over the course of the next 2 years as part of this partnership. We live in this data-driven world, right? And I think it came up earlier that what gets measured gets managed, gets attention, gets understood to some extent, and that data are absolutely critical. So we need lots of good data in. And the more data we have across sort of a diverse set of entities, the better off we are, the more we have to sort of work with. But it's a mess, right? Like all this data coming in at different levels, whether it's sort of economic development data, maybe for your region or state or town, or it's individual data for your company on turnover. How do we sort of make sense of that? And that's sort of what what I'm going to show you sort of in a data architecture slide in just a moment we can do. And it's not the exciting part, it's not the storytelling part, it's not even the discovery part, it's just the work that has to happen behind the scenes to make everything else sort of possible. And that's what we're engaged in right now. But after we get sort of all of these different data streams, the beacon being one, sort of into this repository, then we can start to do the more exciting stuff, moving sort of up that chain of impact. And these filters are really, you know, for researchers, we would call these sort of analyses. David and others are on the call are engineers. There's a couple of different approaches to this. There's sort of this data mining where we can just sort of write software and chug through large amounts of data and look for associations, right, that were previously not found or not intuitive or non-obvious. And then we can go back and say, well, why is that? That's a really interesting finding. And we wouldn't have been able to see that if we didn't have all these different types of data sort of in our system. And then there's what we call sort of this theory-driven approach, right? This is where we sort of have an idea of how this works. So for instance, if we want to take the example of human flourishing, one example might be like, what is the association between sort of resiliency that sort of David was describing, right? And perseverance in financial returns. And if we can sort of show that with data, we have a really powerful case to say maybe capital allocators, we can de-risk an investment for you because when you're working with companies that have this explicit link to their social impact, they're much better able to sort of weather storms. They employees leave at lower rates, they stay more engaged, they persevere through the really tough bits, they're more resilient and nimble to pivot. Those are the kinds of stories that we want to tell with evidence. So that we can actually increase, say, revenue flow or make it easier for you when you're pitching to capital allocators. Also at the policy level, folks would be really interested in that as well. But it's not enough to sort of, okay, ask those questions. And typical academics, you know, as exciting as journal articles are to read, we don't think they're the best communication tool for mobilizing action. So that's when we start to move into the orange and the green circles that you see there. How do we take these data, combine them, ask the right questions, and then turn them into data products that mobilize action, that get people excited about how they can support and get more of that thing we just discovered was really, really good. So we use visualization tools and we're getting much, much better at this. And there's, you know, I'm sure everybody on the call has seen examples and I'll show a couple here in a second. But the idea is to ask the right questions, boil it down to the essence of really what's important with the evidence, and then present it in a way that's digestible and typically visual. Most of us are sort of visual learners. And then we can take that and translate it even further into these collective stories and use our relationships with key stakeholder groups to communicate that story in impactful ways. So I'm going to give just a couple really concrete examples. Laurel, and I'm sorry, I cannot see Q&A here as well, but I guess we'll have an opportunity to ask questions afterwards, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Let me give a couple of concrete examples because this can seem sort of abstract just with the with my circles there. Next slide, Laurel. Okay, this is really complex, and this is the non-exciting stuff that's happening behind the scenes right now. This is sort of our data architecture, and it's just a really generic version of this, but I wanted to show you where your data in the beacon, as we sort of upload and partner with the impact beacon, will reside. And I really want to stress two things here, because we are an institution of higher education. We do a lot. We do $1 billion in government-sponsored research. We take data privacy and security very, very seriously. So we are going to be linking all of these different levels of data together. So starting with some of the data that are coming out of the NASDAQ Center, creating these sort of technical crosswalk files. This is not really important. Getting data from other direct participants in efforts like the Beacon workshops, et cetera. And then this last piece, the green boxes, we're able to put those data alongside data from public use data sets. And the reason I'm telling you this is for twofold. First of all, we think this could be really useful because again, as Sarah was saying, we don't want to create any more work for anyone to get the data that's useful. We want to do that work on the back end, but we can layer in sort of these other sort of SEC filings, other economic indicators from your region, and run without any burden to you sort of these analyses to show that sort of collectively, where you have companies that are focused on social impact and growing, we also start to see, and just sort of using this as an example, improvements in overall health of a community or lower utilization of certain medical types of services. We can do that both within their organization, but even sort of looking at their spillover effects into the community. And we can sort of only do that if we can connect these different data pieces sort of and run those analyses behind the scenes. But to do that, and again, back to my 2 points for this slide, we have data that sit on servers. These are not data that are stored in the cloud. We have a lot of security clearances for those servers because on other projects, we're working with highly sensitive data that's HIPAA compliant, FERPA, which is the education version of HIPAA. We have juvenile justice records in their military service. So the federal government has actually granted us sort of special clearance. We get inspected every year. We take that very, very seriously. Cannot guarantee 100%, as I'm sure many of you who are working in sort of data and IT companies can attest to, but we do pay very close attention to that. The second reason that we're excited to be here as an academic partner is that we work with our Institutional Review Board, our IRB, to make sure that anybody that's providing data into this system really understands that their records are protected, they have rights as participants. We get reviewed regularly on this, and we just think it's really, really important that everybody understand that they are fully consented and where and how their data are going to be used. So this slide, again, just the 2 points, working hard to get this architecture right so that we can produce data products and give them to you that might be useful, in addition to the individual beacon data you would be using, would be helpful to help grow the sectors that you're working across. And that's sort of what I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about. How do we use collective data to grow these important sectors that you're working in? So the next slide. We're going to talk about visualization as one possible tool. So what we're trying to develop with the data that will be coming out of our architecture are really good sort of schematics that we can give to you, like similar to what the impact beacon would do for your individual efforts. We want to sort of do this at the collective level. So I've just grabbed a couple of examples here from the SDGs. And you can see the one on the left is sort of a data dashboard, and I'm sure we're all used to sort of seeing these, that gets updated regularly and data gets directly fed into it. So we can look at sort of sectors in different regions. We can look at geographic mapping. We can see things go up and down in real time. The second is more of a static piece, and this might be more, depending on sort of the time horizon we have for change, might be a more useful piece. But we will be producing these types of products, again, using all of that data that we have in the back end to sort of support the work that you're doing across the different social sectors. And then the last one. This is where we really get to storytelling. And Laura, I'll just ask for the next slide. This is an example. So I'll talk just a little bit about the Evidence to Impact Collaborative now. what we try to do is to take the evidence that we have, the data, the inputs, and really move it into products that we then connect again to these really important sort of systems level type folks. So I'm looking here at policymakers, but we could also easily see how this could be used to grow a sector, right? So I picked an example that we've produced from the education space. And what we were able to do is combine a lot of different data sets to show how high quality early education was actually connected for the economy to a good economy. So we showed how using, again, data from multiple sources, where you had better and higher quality early childhood education, you actually had improvements in inputs into a growth economy. And we then shared this with congressional members in a briefing, and we followed up and like scraped their social media accounts. We looked at all the legislation they introduced. We captured every town hall we could that they or their staff had, and we started to detect changes in how they were talking about early childhood education. And they were using the word in the economy. They were using it as an essential component for economic growth. So we wanted to monitor whether or not our policy intervention had an impact on, maybe creating more opportunities in this space for people that were working in early childhood. So thinking about companies that might be working in this space, curriculum developers, toy producers, people that are providing direct service, opening up early child care centers. If we start to see that this market could potentially be growing because we're connecting it now beyond just good for kids, might this open up other opportunities, again, for capital allocators, for new customers, for all of those kinds of things that startups need to have happen. So that's just sort of one example that I wanted to sort of walk through about why we're better together. We can start to tell our story of social impact across all of these sectors. We're just starting this work. We're going to have sort of some preliminary analysis across some of the dimensions probably within the next month or two. But we're really excited to partner with all of you and hopefully be able to sort of not only import and utilize the social impact data, but then also produce products and sort of outcomes that benefit you. And I'd like to just sort of close with saying that, I hope that we can go back to some of you, and when we have something in a discovery that we're not quite sure how that works, to maybe interview a few of you, collect some qualitative data from you all, and then also perhaps get you to look at early versions and prototypes so that we can iterate quickly through our product life cycle on the data side. So I'll stop there and say thank you, and maybe open it up for any questions if we have them. Moving down. And Sarah, okay, I see the chat.
I can take the first one, I think, in terms of typical size of investment, which I think is directed to City Light. So City Light's a seed and Series A investor. So our seed stage checks are 50,000, 50. Series A checks are $2 to $4 million. And then let's see, key factors for marketing and storytelling and biggest mistake entrepreneurs make. So I think the way that we talk about impact being useful for marketing and storytelling in a lot of ways comes down to how you're demonstrating return on investment for your customers. And so for every dollar that they spend with you, what does that mean in terms of the outcome that they can anticipate? And so for the three sectors that we focus on, you might talk about healthcare is probably one of the easiest places to demonstrate this, where you say, spending an extra dollar on every employee that you have, spending $1 on their mental health gains you $1.50 in productivity, or spending $1 prevents $1.50 of lost productivity. There's plenty of, and the Beacon does some of this, but when we get more bespoke with each of our portfolio companies around what exact metrics are there that they should be tracking and that they can demonstrate this ROI on, we're looking for research out there that's been done by people like Meg that show, like, if this social impact happens, what is the economic impact, or vice versa? And so we're able to kind of demonstrate to customers that this is a worthwhile investment for you over the long term, because you are increasing the value to yourself by spending a little bit of money now. Sometimes that's even more immediate, like cost savings can be fairly immediate. The accessibility of a product or a service can have an immediate effect, but the outcomes tend to be a little bit further out. And so telling the story is really about the long-term vision for that business, and why this story makes sense for the customer as well as you. In terms of mistakes, I think that one thing that we do have to be careful with some of these impact metrics is, and we haven't run into this problem frequently, but there's no kind of guarantee of, this is absolutely going to happen, especially if you're at the very, very early stages of a business, because you just don't have enough data yet to really say exactly what the outcome is going to be definitively every time. Once you've hit product market fit and you've been there for a while and you're replicating the same process over and over again, that's where you might be able to take some of those metrics and say, we can guarantee that as soon as this product comes in, X impact is felt, or maybe it's 6 months later, or whatever the right time frame is. But guaranteeing that up front can be somewhat problematic. And also I think the biggest problem, and something that the impact industry has been dealing with, is just not being genuine. Like the products that City Light invests in, the products are genuinely impactful. Like they do not work if they don't have impact. And so it's really hard to separate that out. There's a lot of companies that come to us and talk about their impact, and it's kind of ancillary. Like it's not the purpose of the business is not to have impact. It happens to be a byproduct of what they do, but it's not the core of what they're about. And I wish that there were like a clear dividing line to say, this is, we know that a company is genuine if they're doing this, and we know that they're not if they're doing that. But there really isn't a hard and fast rule around like what that means. It really has to do with working with that person over a longer period of time to understand, like, are they making decisions that optimize for their stakeholders, or are they doing it to optimize for their shareholders? And we as City Light will always go with the former. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Meg.
No, I think that was great. I was just looking at a question about early education that I can take. I'll answer that one. So early education concepts, has there been measured outcomes? Yes, there has. And we'd be happy to make available sort of those outcomes. So we've combined data in sort of this meta-analytic way, and we've been able to track kids longitudinally. So we have sort of the best design on that. The kids that have access to high quality education programs have better outcomes than their peers across a whole number of domains, health outcomes, less involvement in sort of with juvenile justice, with career outcomes that are better. And we've even been able to sort of now refine and define sort of what that high quality environment looks like. And in the work that we do, particularly around kids' social emotional competencies, before kindergarten, at kindergarten entry, are better predictors of academic outcomes in high school than our actual academic pre-reading skills, et cetera. They're all important, but it's the social emotional competencies that really sort of carry the day. So happy to share all of those data. We have brief reports that we can make available too. So thanks for that question.
I've seen a couple of questions come in, both from before the panel and here around how do you measure things that aren't measurable? So PR, all of these things that seem like you can really just point to it and say, well, it's there, but how do I quantify that? And I think that there are, we have seen companies get very inventive in the ways that I would say, first of all, there's no standard for how you measure that. I think that different companies use NPS. They might have employee satisfaction surveys. They might be able to point to, if they have a long enough history, they might be able to point to like employee retention, employee turnover. The single most important thing to do when somebody is asking for those indicators is to find a benchmark to compare against. And so where can you find information on employee satisfaction or PR or one of these intangible assets or improvements? Where has somebody quantified that in the past? And I can guarantee you that there has been some study of, positive PR and the impact that it had, or lack of positive PR. Because what you're trying to establish is, what is the alternative to me not doing what I'm doing and having that positive impact? And so where do you draw the benchmark data from to say, this is what I'm going to compare against? And it's that, somebody who didn't have an impact PR strategy had these outcomes, or somebody who didn't have an impact strategy had these many applicants to their jobs, or this level of skills that are on their workforce. I think that there are ways to say, we can either find that data, or if that data doesn't exist, I think that there are definitely ways to make the argument around, like, this is why we believe that the alternative or the benchmark is X right now. And so we're starting from here, and the reason we're better is because of Y. And the measurement there you can get, I think, somewhat inventive with, because there is no like definitive, this is the way to measure employee satisfaction. But if you have that benchmark to then say, okay, well, our employees are better because of X, Y, and Z, like 70% more of them report being engaged at work, or 90% more of them said they would stay even if we had to cut their salaries, or whatever the right kind of mode of capturing some of that data is, especially if you're an early stage company and you may not have as much of a history to rely upon. I think doing any kind of data collection and just framing the questions correctly and making sure that you're capturing the right information to be able to point to and say, this is how we know that things are better off. CityLight, part of the reason that we started the Beacon was to start collecting some of this information on our own companies to understand, how does the relationship between how they talk about impact compare to how long people stay on their teams, and how much higher their revenue is, and how much longer customers engage with them. You might point to things like sales cycles, or again, like the number of applications that you get for job openings that come through. I wish that I could say like there's this really easy formula for doing it. But I think as long as your kind of methodology for how you quantify that and how you put that into dollars and cents makes sense, there are clients that would say, this makes sense. Or maybe they have their own calculation and you can borrow that to make your argument. But there isn't, so far as I know, there isn't like a hard and fast way to say, PR is worth this many dollars, or positive PR that comes from impact is worth this many dollars. So come up with your own way of doing it, I guess, is the answer. I'm going to go back to, I think I'm the chat here. Minimum level of protection needed by a founder before they hire to help with product development. I think for any startup, if there is a, so the question is, what is the minimum level of protection needed by a founder before they hire students or others to assist with product development? I think if there's intellectual property associated with the project or with the company, it's pretty simple to have a student or an intern sign an NDA. We do that for all of our for every intern that comes and works at City Light. I think that what you need to be aware of is how much ownership you have over that IP, and how much you're going to be able to enforce any kind of breakage of that NDA or something going awry, but not necessarily. There's not really too much risk, I would say, if you have the right kind of legal documents in place. In terms of tools to calculate, so there's a question about tools to calculate ESG impact. So ESG, just to paint the broader picture of what that means compared to more product-based impact, which is what the Impact Beacon and more City Light are focused on. ESG is environmental, social, and governance, which tend to have more to do with things like representation. So how many women or people of color are on the board or in the customer base or in the workforce. Environmental is, what impact does this company have on climate change? And social is what impact does this have on society? And so ESG actually tends to be a little bit more focused on the public sector and public equities, because I don't want to say it's easily measurable, but it is something that levels the playing field in a way that product-based impact metrics don't. So we can measure, and what I mean by that is we can measure across our portfolio how many women are founders of companies, how many people of color are on the management teams, who their customers are from a demographic perspective. But once we get beyond that, it's really difficult for us to say to, for example, an education company, you need to tell us about your carbon emissions, because for a company that's 4 people and is like completely focused on some kind of early childhood education intervention, they're just not focused on their clean energy output. They might want to be, but laser focusing on the childhood education thing is where all of their resources are going. And so us coming to them, especially as an investor, and asking, tell us about your environmental impact as well, doesn't work as well. But there are tools out there. So the BLab assessment is intended to be a measurement for ESG. SASB, SASB, which I believe stands for the analytics of social businesses, also measures ESG. There's Y Analytics does that to a certain extent. You can find a lot of different resources for kind of getting an estimation of what your ESG is. Most of them you have to pay for, honestly. I think the BLab assessment costs like $500. And so but you can find a lot of resources out there that tell you kind of what ESG is. And as long as you're building that into the business from the beginning and saying, okay, how are we taking into account E, S, and G in every decision that we're making, you're probably kind of up to par with the rest of the industry, and probably better off than most existing companies out there by even just thinking about it and putting it top of mind. Let me go back to some of these questions. Does the current marketplace mandate a greater need for pitches to focus on startup efforts that have de-risked investment in their businesses? Yes and no. I think so. My understanding of this question, and I don't know if the person who asked it is here, but my understanding of this question is, do you need to demonstrate a certain level of de-risking your invest or your opportunity before somebody will invest? Yes and no. I mean, it's depending on what stage you're at. For City Light, since we do seed and Series A, like we're used to taking quite a lot of risk. There's going to be more unknowns than there are knowns. We're just trying to figure out, is this a market that looks attractive? Is this a founder that is, has demonstrated their capability to build a company, or their ability to run a team? Do we know what the competitive landscape looks like? The de-risking really comes along with, how many customers do you have? How much revenue do you have? And so the further along you are, the more de-risked you are. But that's a different type of investment that you're looking for at that point. Like VC, this has changed somewhat in the last 3 years even. VC used to not be the financing that came in when you were valued at $1 billion. Like that's when you went public. That's when the public market started to take over. That's no longer the case. But you generally are, if you're early stage VC looking at fairly risky investments, you want to see it be as de-risked as possible. Anybody does. And so any demonstration of, adoption or cost getting lower or whatever the right metric is going to be positive for the business. We look at that from the impact side also. Like if you have been able to demonstrate, maybe there was a pilot that you ran or an A/B test that you ran when you first started off, where you had one group go through, use your product and the other group not, and you've demonstrated what that delta is in terms of impact. That to us is de-risking the product, because we know that you've had a trial run and that it works in ways that we wouldn't know that unless you had actually put it out into the field. And that gives us confidence from an impact perspective that when you actually do deploy this at scale, it's not going to break. Because the risk there is if you put out an education product that doesn't help people get smarter or get better jobs or do any of that stuff, and you're just trying to get it out there as quickly as possible, you run the risk of failing, basically, because you put your product in the hands of thousands of people and it doesn't work for anybody and they stop buying it. And so we look for kind of de-risked investments from the impact side of things too. Let's see. Trying to find other questions here. How to uncover funding sources and get in front of people specifically for film projects. I can't answer specifically for film projects because it's not something that we invest in, but one piece of advice that I might give to entrepreneurs who are looking for that first funding source is to make a list of some of the investors that you admire or that you think you might want to have on your cap table at some point, and get in front of them fairly early without the ask for money. So if you're a pre-seed company, start talking to like a handful of seed and Series A investors, not with the expectation that that is a person that's going to write you a check at that point, but just that you want to get to know them and understand whether they're the right fit and get their advice for what they would need to see in order to write you a check. And be, in the same way that, dropping a resume to 100 different job applications with no personalization is not going to get you very far. Doing the same thing with VCs is not going to get you very far. And so do your research, find the ones that you think you would be a good fit for, and write a personalized email. Even if it's a cold email, write something that's personalized that shows that you took the time to get to know them in the investment thesis. That's what's going to get them to answer you and to take the time to talk to you. And they'll remember that more than they will a cold email that didn't have their name or the name of the fund in it. And so that sort of funding source for a VC is, I think there's increasingly less reliance on warm introductions, but it has to still be kind of, has to still be genuine and not just, you know, a blind carbon copy blast. Okay, what do you think would be what you need to come to the table with when having a conversation with a VC? I mean, at a very basic level, you need to have a pitch deck or something like a pitch deck that we can look at to be able to say, okay, what does this company do? I never want to go into a conversation completely blind and say, I have no idea what this company does. I don't know who the founder is. I don't know like how big they think it can be. And because I need to know for both of our sakes, like, is this conversation going to be helpful or a waste of both of our times? What is, I think, frustrating on both sides is when like we get introduced to companies on occasion that get recommended to us because they're impact companies, but it's an impact company that's based in Australia, and we don't invest outside of the United States. And so we can try to be helpful, but it's better for us to know upfront how that conversation is, like how we should frame that conversation for that entrepreneur, so that we're not getting to the very end of the conversation, then finding out that they're in Australia and saying, well, we can't invest in you. It's just, it feels like we've wasted their time. And so knowing kind of where, having some context for the meeting is really important. In terms of like what metrics or milestones you need to have hit, it really depends on the stage of investor. I think at any, for any meeting, you should probably be ready to talk about a financial model. You should be ready to talk about your product roadmap. You should be ready to talk about like how you envision the company growing, what hires you need to make, and just, again, be genuine, like talk about where you think you're missing talent, where you're missing, or like what you're worried about with the business. Because we know that things aren't going to be like all rosy all the time. But be ready to talk about like how big you think your business can get and what you need to do to get there and why you need their help specifically, and know your numbers. I think one of the more frustrating things is when we ask a CEO to tell us what they think their revenue is going to be for the year and they just don't know. That's concerning to us. Similarly with like the impact side of things, if they don't know, if they can't explain to us how the company has impact, we are going to need to go back to the drawing board and try and figure out what is it that, like, is the impact just not here? Are we not understanding it? Or is there some other way that we can like either go through the beacon or work with the company to understand like how might we see this come out? I don't know if that answers the question, but that would be my recommendation. Provide the pitch deck in the email when reaching out, or wait for them to respond back with time. I think it's up to you whether you want to send the pitch deck ahead of time. I think I always want it before I meet you. But it's whether, if they respond and ask for it, then I think you should send it. If not, I think it's fine to say, you know, you can direct them to a website or Crunchbase profile or something like that for just to get a sense of what your business does. Okay. I think the only question in here that I haven't answered is, what advice would I give to my younger self? So I'll answer that one. Then maybe I'll ask Meg to answer that one too. And then I think we might be able to wrap up a little early. The advice so I'm going to tie that back to the impact stuff. The advice that I would give my younger self, I very much focused on impact from the very beginning, and I'm proud that I did that. I wish that I had focused a little bit more on data. and kind of gotten very familiar with data platforms and tried to spend more time thinking through, like, you know, I'm collecting all this impact data. City Light uses impact data for virtually everything we do, but how can I use that to inform other projects that we're working on and other directions that we think we want to go in? And I think that working with Meg and the folks at the NASDAQ has been helpful for being able to leverage some other people with those talents instead of developing them myself. But I think I would tell myself that it's really important to understand those things from the get-go and not wait until somebody asks me about them to make them relevant. And so incorporating impact from the very beginning and knowing what metrics I should be tracking, what data is relevant, would be what I would tell myself in a former life. But any comments?
Yeah, I would give the opposite answer. It's so funny because we come from different disciplines. I would have, so I'm in public health and I stayed in my vertical too long. I would have reached out to colleagues in our schools of business and outside the university, sort of working on teams that are diverse, both from perspective and life experience, et cetera, and tried to go a bit faster on combining all these methods for social impact, rather than doing more of the traditional, less risky sort of stay in your lane kind of work. So I'm glad I sort of have this vertical, but I would tell my younger self, don't stay in that too long, reach out.
I think that is good as well.
Those are all great advice. And, you know, I think it's interesting that for so many of our entrepreneurs that we are fortunate to work with, the level of confidence that they have from knowing that they're empowered with data behind them in the passion for why they're building businesses is part of what I think you both shared with us today. And I know it's one of the main drivers and reasons that we're so excited to be a part of this amazing project with Impact Beacon. It's easy enough to sort of put in a number, right? Everyone has been told always, like, oh, just put in, you're going to be $1 billion company. And then you sit there and you hope and you think, like, how am I going to justify the fact that I'm $1 billion company? And that's probably not even the real driver as to why you're building the business in the first place. Most of the reason for all the things that you shouldn't be doing and all the rational decisions as to why not to be an entrepreneur, you're doing this because you usually want to be making a difference in your world. This is a tool that can enable you to feel confident and grounded, and also be able to share those measurements and impact numbers with all the stakeholders involved. There is power in an infographic that is compelling to you as a founder when you're out in the world sharing this story. It was one of the main reasons why we're so excited and so delighted that this tool can live out there for you entrepreneurs who are building things for the betterment of our communities, for the betterment of our individual lives and the world at large. I hope that this session has been as inspiring and empowering as I know I've gained great tips and insights from. David, Meg, Sarah, all of you, thank you so much for your contributions today. Just like with everything, I've got one ask in return. Our ask in return is we only get smarter by you giving us the feedback on what more you need. So you'll see a link dropped into the chat box in just a moment for the feedback, not just for this session, but also, again, what are the challenges that you're facing right now? We would love to learn from you so that we can continue to build forth the right tools and opportunities that you need us to be focusing in on as a nonprofit in this space. Again, for all of you joining, thank you so much. For our sponsors who make this possible, our deepest gratitude. We wish you an amazing week ahead, and we look forward to keeping you posted on this opportunity and more as we go forward. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye-bye. you.